Welcome, everyone. My name's Graham Hunt. I'm the co-convener of the Renew Sydney Central Branch. Welcome to you all, even if you're signing in locally from the Sydney region, elsewhere in Australia, or maybe even from overseas. It is exciting, and it's always great that we can engage so easily with so many people from so many different locations. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which the Sydney Central Branch operates and where I am at the moment, which is the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation. We acknowledge their leaders, past, present and emerging, and we also acknowledge their sustainable stewardship of the country over many millennia. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional leaders of other parts of the country or in other lands, wherever you may be joining us from. Before I start, I would like to make a couple of announcements about our upcoming future events for the branch. In May, we will be having a webinar on food waste to energy with both Sydney Water and City of Sydney Council participating. It'll be happening on Monday, the 10th of May, and it'll be an online webinar. So keep an eye out for the emails, which will be going out in the next couple of weeks in regard to that. In June, to follow on from the waste theme, we are organising a tour of an apartment where Mirvac recently unveiled an industry-first apartment using interior materials made from waste glass and old clothing, which is a result of a collaborative effort between Mirvac and the Uni of New South Wales Smart Centre, which recently featured on a Australia Story show on the ABC. Details of this meeting are still to be confirmed, but likely to occur in the second week of June. So again, keep an eye out for that. But tonight we're talking about electric vehicles. And we have two really good speakers joining us. Our first speaker is Clive Attwater, who is the Vice President of the Australian Electric Vehicle Association, AEVA. We have had speakers from AEVA in the past at our local branch, and we also had a stall at their expo in Sydney, I think the year before last. So it's great to can build on that collaboration. Clive has driven electric vehicles since 2014. He is part of a group of investors that have helped complete the Tasmanian statewide EV fast charge network, and that's so crucial to making electric vehicles viable. Clive believes EVs are now inevitable and will happen faster than most people think. And so he believes also that the focus should be on making the transition happen well. Our second speaker is Mr. Anthony Broese van Groenou, who is a co-founder and director of the Good Car Company, originally based in Tasmania, and you may have seen an article on this company in a recent Renew magazine. He is also a PhD researcher investigating socio-technical systems and modelling the uptake on electric vehicles, identifying opportunities and barriers for an equitable transition to electric transport. If you have technical issues during the evening, please use the chat function to get assistance, and you can ask questions using the Q&A button. So please make sure your questions go into the Q&A area rather than the chat section. We will go through questions at the end of the presentations. It is normal that we get many more questions than we will have time for, so please be patient. If possible, if we can't answer your question now, we will try and do it by email later. We'll be recording our presentation, and that should be available on the Renew YouTube channel shortly. We also need to send out links for the recordings of our other recent webinars that have occurred. So that's all the housekeeping. I will now invite Clive to give his presentation. So welcome, Clive.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I trust I've been unmuted. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen when I get through the steps of that. Okay, I'm going to start off with a little bit of context setting, some history and the where's and why fors of EVs, and then spend the second part of my talk on talking about what to look for or what to think about if you're considering purchasing a particular EV for your use. So why are electric vehicles? There we go. Why are electric vehicles so good? And they are being increasingly used worldwide because there's a series of benefits. For the driver, they're quieter, smoother, more reliable. From an economic point of view, start my video. I seem to be having a problem with my bandwidth. From an economic point of view, we're running on locally produced energy, not imported oil. And electric vehicles introduced properly and well managed can improve grid performance and actually contribute to reducing electricity costs. And finally, next slide, please. There we go. Somewhere around 2025, the cost of electric vehicles will actually become equivalent to and eventually even cheaper than internal combustion engine vehicles. So if they're so great, why aren't they all over the place already? Well, first of all, we have to understand what led to their uptake. Electric vehicles have been around since the dawn of the automotive age. There was as many electric vehicles on the road in the late 1800s and early 20th century as there were petrol ones. But they were based on lead acid batteries, and it wasn't competitive with the way developments occurred with internal combustion engine at the time. And so very little progress was made until the 1990s. And what kicked that off? Well, what kicked it off, in fact, was really bad air quality, particularly in the US and California and the Northeast, in the European Union, and then later in the 90s in Chinese cities. And this led to a whole bunch of regulations to reduce emissions, which had in some cases the effect of increasing fuel efficiency, but certainly to try and reduce the amount of not CO2, that wasn't a greenhouse gas issue at that time, it was an air quality problem. And that led to a lot of incentives, a lot of regulations, which helped to spur the development of electric vehicles. But although that's what made it necessary, it was battery prices that made it possible. And the drivers of battery prices weren't cars. They were consumer electronics, laptops, cell phones, power tools, and the like. And it's the development for these applications where lithium-ion battery technology really advanced. So if we look at the split of use, as recently as 2013, those consumer electronics dominated. They were about 60% of the market for lithium-ion batteries. Demand for batteries grew very strongly, and up to about 2020, the split's closer to this. Consumer electronics actually grew in that time, but other things grew much faster. And even here, it's not automotive applications that dominate. It's grid and renewable energy applications. And what do we mean by that? Well, there's the Hornsdale big battery that was opened in South Australia a few years ago, but that's been replicated in so many places around the world. It's become a very big user of battery technology. And inside all of those big boxes, what do we find? Lots of little cells. Same things they put into cars. Okay, so that battery price curve has been falling. I might note this goes back to 2010. It's been falling for 30 years. It started off around about $10,000 a kilowatt hour in around the 1990s, and it's been coming down at about 18% per year over the last decade, and every reason to believe that will continue. When it drops below about $100 a kilowatt hour, that's about when electric vehicles become cost competitive as a new vehicle to purchase, still much cheaper to run, and we think that's going to occur around 2025. That will actually occur in terms of market prices for cars at different times in different countries and for different market segments, but it's a ballpark estimate, and it's still on track for that. So overseas, we've seen a huge growth in electric vehicles. There's over 10 million on the road today. 10 years ago, there were barely any. That strong global growth has been driven by incentives and regulations, not by consumers, though some consumers have certainly been early adopters and brought it along. China is, in fact, the world's largest EV market and now the largest manufacturer. And although some people have made negative comments about Chinese products, we see some very good quality production coming out of China, not just in automotive, but across a whole lot of fields. I think it's a bit like Japan after the Second World War. They were first thought of as producing cheap junk, and then they became the very top end of the market. I expect to see that transition out of China over the next 5 years. In terms of countries, the per capita adoption is highest in Norway. And as of early this year, 78% of all newly registered cars are electric. So not quite 100%, but it's moving up pretty high. We now see fast charge networks covering many countries, and we're even growing in Australia. So how do we sit? Not so well. There's about 15,000 EVs in Australia. New Zealand has more. We have about 220 fast charge stations in Australia, which is a big improvement over the 45 we had about 3 years ago. So when will EVs become widespread? We think there are 5 factors that have to be achieved: familiarity, adequate range, variety of models, capital cost competitive, and a perception of an adequate charging infrastructure. Familiarity is building. If we compare the reaction we get when we go out to shows and do displays, the change from 5 years ago is dramatic. A recent survey found that 15% of Australians said that their next car will be an EV. That's a huge shift over the last 2 or 3 years. Adequate range, basically most of the models on offer from 2019 have about 250 kilometers range or more. Some of the early models had quite limited ranges, but we're not really seeing those entering the market at the moment. A variety of models. Overseas, there are literally hundreds of models available, but not yet here. We're more like about 35, I think the latest count. So we've got an awful lot yet to come, and that will undoubtedly increase the options for buyers and the number of cars sold. And in terms of the perception of adequate charging infrastructure, sometimes referred to dots on maps, where people can say, yes, I can get there and I don't have to be worried about range. Tasmania is now pretty much covered. New South Wales is fairly covered for most of the population centers. The far west obviously is very hard to do, and that'll take some time. And other states, I would say, are developing. So let's look at that charge network. What's it look like? That's the slow charge, the AC charging network. You can find out where all these stations are with an app called PlugShare. There's actually a number of apps for helping to find charge stations, but PlugShare is probably the most widely used and easiest. A lot of these are power points at caravan parks or cafes and restaurants. Some places have installed actual chargers as opposed to just a power point, which will charge your car more quickly, but still relatively slowly. And increasingly, we're seeing local governments putting them in car parks and things like that. Some of them are free. Some of them charge a fee, but they're all relatively quite slow. What do they look like? They can look like little things on a post. They can look like larger boxes, or that bottom left-hand picture. It's just a PowerPoint in a wall where someone's put up a sign and said, you can use this to charge your car. The fast charge network is not as well developed yet across the country, but it's coming on quickly. Recently, ARENA announced some funds to boost the fast charge network and devoted $16.5 million to funding 8 greater metropolitan regions around the cities of Australia. They will decide those grants in May or June, and they have to be installed within the next 2 years. So that should see probably another 100 to 150 fast chargers installed just from that. And then they're going to have another round later for regional areas. It's fairly expensive to install a fast charger, and they use quite a bit of power. So very few of them are free. Mostly there's a fee. It is the most expensive way to charge. You're much better off to charge at home overnight in your driveway or carport or garage if you have private off-street parking. But if you have to, you can charge at a fast charger, and you will pay a price which is roughly comparable to the cost of petrol. terrible, awfully expensive. Payments via an app or RFID card. A few sites are taking credit cards. There are several different networks, which means you need to load several apps or have several RFID cards, which is unfortunate, something which I hope the industry will overcome and provide a single solution for travelers as they move around. Fast chargers come in lots of different shapes and sizes. These are just a few. I've picked Tasmanian ones because I had the pictures, but you'll see a similar shaped charger in many parts of the country. Tritium is a dominant charger manufacturer for the Australian sites. They're an Australian manufacturer, which is great. But we are going to see more and more overseas fast chargers as well over the next little while. All right, so you want to buy an EV. What do you need to look for? Well, the first thing you do is you look for all the normal stuff. An EV should not be a compromise. It should be fit for purpose. It should do the things you need it to do. If it's not, you will not be happy with it as a car, and we don't recommend you buying an EV which doesn't suit your needs. So look at the seating and the boot space and all the other things you would look for any other car you would purchase. But there's some things you do need to consider specifically for electric vehicles. The first is the range. How far do you really need to go on a charge? Number two is charging. Can you charge at home? And if not, what are you going to do about that? And battery life, just understanding a little bit about what makes them tick and how to make them last longer. So in terms of range, the average daily journey of an Australian car is about 40 kilometers. Well, you may not be average. You could be using an EV as a second car, which gets fewer miles and pretty well local trips only. Might be just doing local run around school and shopping. Or you might have a longer commute. You might do more than 40 kilometers a day, but it's very predictable. And you know roughly how far you're going to go and where your journey takes you. Or you may be a traveling salesman and do thousands of kilometers a week, in which case you'll have a different set of needs. But the thing to think about with EVs is that normally if you've got charging at home, which basically means private off-street parking, you will usually leave with either a full charge or as much charge as you need. And the idea that you have to fill up away from home with any regularity doesn't apply that often. For highway driving, you do need a reasonable range, and some of the shorter range vehicles aren't so practical for that. A reasonable driving time between stops is about 2 hours, and that will take you about 200 kilometers. So if you've got a vehicle with a 250 kilometer range and there are recharging options along the route, you can just recharge when you would normally stop for a break. And that's a good rhythm to get into. I've driven from Melbourne to Sydney in my EV, and it didn't take particularly longer than it does in a regular car, even though I did charge 4 times, because I just arranged that for a morning coffee break, lunch, etc., as I went along my trip. But you do need to plan your route a little bit in order to make that work, particularly where chargers are not so thick in the ground. In terms of charging, can you charge at home? The main thing is to have private off-street parking. If you haven't got that, then it's harder. If you do, it is the cheapest and most convenient option. The easiest way to get charging at home is just to have a 15 amp power point. I've had an EV now for 7 years, and that's all I have ever used. But you can get much more sophisticated chargers, which give you much more control and can take better advantage of your solar, etc. Solar is particularly cheap if you can put it on your roof. But with or without solar, generally it's a good idea to switch to an off-peak tariff and then charge your car during off-peak times. And that's true even if you have solar. If you don't have private off-street parking, that can be a little bit harder. If you have a longer range vehicle, you may find that you can charge once or twice a week in a public charger. You need to look in your local area for public charging options. Many areas are very well supplied already, and you can charge, and in some cases even for free. Practicality varies a great deal by location, so you need to really do some investigation if you don't have access to private off-street parking. Finally, batteries. How long will it last? Well, what we're finding is that longer range batteries last longer because they go through fewer charge-discharge cycles. So if you get a car that's got a longer range, you'll find that the battery in that car will take you more kilometers simply because it's not charging and discharging as often. The key thing is if you get a used car, get a report on the battery capacity and health. This issue about the battery cost and the cost of replacement, I believe, will become much less important over time as batteries are becoming cheaper. And more businesses will offer things like reconditioning and replacement. They're not doing it yet because the market's not there. There's just not enough cars on the road. But we'll see these things pop up over the next few years. Treat your battery well, it will last longer. If you charge to 80% for day-to-day routine use, only 100% if you really need to. Don't leave it parked fully charged at 100% or fully discharged for over, say, half a day, not certainly any length of time, long periods of time. Avoid excess heat if possible. Key thing is if you get a car repair, don't let them bake the car in an oven to bake the paint. That will kill the battery. And if you use eco mode, it does tend to extend the life of the battery. I think I've used all of my time, so I'm going to hand back and I'll take questions after Anthony.
Okay, thank you, Clive. Yes, a lot to digest there. We lost you at one point. There was one slide you had on 5 reasons, I think, and there was one item in there about capital cost. I was wondering if you could just recap that, if possible.
Just that the capital costs are expected to match those of internal combustion engine cars around about 2025.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, it's a shame we don't have the regulations and the incentives they do overseas. And what that means is we have to rely on people doing their own initiative. And I think that's what Anthony's going to talk to us about, is a commercial enterprise who has seen an opportunity and is providing better access to electric vehicles for people. So I'll now hand over to Anthony from the Good Car Company. Thank you.
Excellent. Hey, everybody. It's good to see a bunch of familiar faces out there, and it's a really good turnout. Just want to double check, which screen are you guys seeing? The right screen to present a view, or the?
Yes, it's fine. Really? Excellent.
Okay, cool. So we are the Good Car Company. Kind of came about from my PhD. I'm looking at EV uptake and ways of being able to get equitable access to electric vehicles and just really get the uptake happening. We also sit on the electric vehicle working group here, and we've got an initiative to try and get electric vehicles into fleets. That's a fantastic initiative into fleets for the government, but that's probably going to be another 4 or 5 years until we actually get electric cars here. So we started it. We were sitting down thinking how to do it, and that's the team of Good Car Company. This is Anton, Sam, Fiona, and Andrea, and myself. We are basically the Good Car Company. What we do is provide affordable electric vehicles. In order to really realize all the benefits that we can get from electric vehicles, we definitely have to get them down to a price point that people can afford. So what we do is we've created a secondhand car market from scratch. We deliver affordable EVs by importing electric cars and vans from Japan and the UK. And in short, this allows us to deliver EVs that start around $17,000. The real reason why we're doing this is because electric vehicles really are the future of transport and energy. My main motivation for doing this is to see thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of electric vehicles out there in the network, being able to be aggregated and orchestrated to feed back those massive batteries which are in the vehicles into the homes, into businesses, and into the grid, and ultimately to be able to support renewable energy uptake with this amount of batteries. I mean, that's the key to unlocking some of the intermittency with renewables. And we're right there. Like we can actually, we're on the cusp of this huge transition of really being able to decarbonize our grid. And then of course, there's all the other benefits of being able to have fuel security. We're no longer dependent on imported fossil fuels. And then the health benefits, the economic benefits. Electric vehicles are pretty incredible, and they're fun to drive. They're great. So we start with community actions. By running these community bulk buys. In the picture there, that's our South Hobart bulk buy, and you can see everybody there with their EVs happy. The main thing is to demystify EVs. Having that visibility out there is a huge part in people being able to, well, the community members become advocates for electric vehicles, people stop and ask. But the most important thing is that it's a policy lever. By having this concentrated uptake, what we're able to do is be able to approach local and state government, federal governments, networks and utilities and manufacturers, and just show like there is a real interest for electric vehicles. And so that in turn is a trigger for being able to have more charging rollout, incentives and supportive policies to get more uptake. In the words of Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. These are some of our customers. This is Rosie. She was our very first customer. My favorite thing is driving without the guilt factor. My second favorite thing is the electric warmer seats. Yeah, there's Jeremy, likes how smooth and fast they are. Yeah, generally people love the vehicles. And I think if you spend more than a couple of hours in the car, you're really converted to the driving experience that is just so much better and cleaner. This is a nice little bit of props for being used car dealers with a good, honest streak. Like we're doing this as the values proposition. So the vehicles that we provide, we've got the Nissan Leaf, that's a 24 kilowatt hour car and a 30 kilowatt hour car. Going to Clive's point on the range and the limited range that they provide. So the 24 kilowatt hour Leaf will get you about 120 Ks and starts around $17,000. It's a sweet car for a great price. And considering, as Clive pointed out, the average Australian commuter is only around 40 Ks, this more than covers your needs. And at the price point, especially when you consider the total cost of ownership, that reduced fuel cost and greatly reduced maintenance cost, it only takes a few years until these have paid themselves off. And they're already, like that price parity is pretty much there after a couple of years. And from there on, it's just a car that almost, well, it doesn't appreciate in value, but it's a lot cheaper to run. And it's money in your pocket there. We figure that this is probably the thing that will suit most people, 90% of your usage. And if you have a second car, then you use that. Or with the money that you save, it's probably cheaper to hire another vehicle. We also have the 30 kilowatt hour Leaf. It's got more bells and whistles on it, and it gets around 170 K driving range. They're really versatile. You can put a tow ball on the back, tow a small box trailer, put your bike on there or roof racks, kayak. We also have the 40 kilowatt hour Leaf and the 62 kilowatt hour Leaf. The 62 kilowatt hour Leaf isn't yet released in Australia, but we've been selling it for the last almost a year now. And that's the beauty of doing this business model as well, is that we can bring other models into the market, which the manufacturers don't identify Australia as a viable market. So we can circumvent that and bring these models into the country. 62 kilowatt hour Leaf will get you around a 350 K range. We also do the wagons, commercial 2-seaters, 5-seaters, and 7-seaters. And they come in the 24 kilowatt hour battery for around $25,000 and the 40 kilowatt hour battery, which gets you around the 240 K range, around $50,000. So why the good car company? Like I said, we can bring new models into Australia. For example, a cost comparison of a model that we can bring in, like the 40 kilowatt hour Leaf, that comes in around $38,000 versus $55,000 sold here. That's about a 31% saving. And if you go through a bulk buy, it's even more affordable. We offer up to a 3-year battery warranty on secondhand imported vehicles, 6-month mechanical warranty, and a 30-day return policy, which I think is a really important thing, so that if it doesn't fit with your life, then you can always return it. Like de-risking electric vehicles is really important. And that's also why we do the battery replacements. We've done one so far, and it was not for a car that we imported, but for a vehicle that had an older vehicle that had degraded batteries. It was a really simple process. We were able to get a vehicle in great condition from a vehicle that had panel damage, and it took us about 2 hours to fit it in there. It's really a thing. And the beauty with the Leafs is that you can get the 24, 30, 40, and the 62 kilowatt hour Leaf battery packs. They're all the same size and fit nicely into the bays. Sourcing the batteries at the moment is a tricky thing, but that's changing very rapidly. We also offer ongoing support, which is really important, I think. The bulk buy benefits. So if you're going through the bulk buy, you save around $1,500 upfront on all the aggregated savings throughout the supply chain. And then when we do the bulk buys, we have a maximum price that you'll pay for the vehicle, which covers the purchase price. But if it comes in any cheaper at the auctions, then we return all of that portion of the money. So we're really transparent with what the costs are through there. And we do battery diagnostics, really important for any secondhand car. You want to be able to see the history of the car, so you can see the life cycle of how many quick charges versus slow charges, and drill down into the individual cell health and just make sure that, you know, the whole pack is balanced and everything's performing as it should. Otherwise, we don't touch it. Yeah, so it's significantly cheaper through the bulk buy, but otherwise you can always just get a car directly through us. So the bulk buy journey, we run information sessions, there's a bunch of research out there on the vehicles and batteries, and we present as much as required, take you through the journey, issue a contract, milestone 1 payment. That's when we can go out and buy the car. Then it gets shipped to you, it goes across the sea. As it lands here, you pay the final milestone payment, and it's delivered to your door or to your chosen mechanic for roadworthy, and we get the roadworthy and it's all ready for you. How to register. I'll put this in the chat as well, but on the website, there's Beyond Zero Emissions, Sydney North, bulk buy. That's the place to register for the Sydney North bulk buy. That's with Zero Emissions Sydney North, and a number of other partners that we're working on the delivery time for that. We just wrapped up bulk buys with Hepburn Community Wind, South Hobart Sustainable Community, Huon Circular Economy, Sea Change in Canberra, and the next ones off the bat are Geelong and Sydney North. We've gone through a Clean Tech Accelerator program with Energy Lab, and that's been fantastic to really form the broader vision of being able to provide a real transition to electric vehicles. If you have any more questions, go onto the website or give us a call or send an email. Happy to take questions now. Stop sharing and jump into it.
Okay, thanks muchly, Anthony. That's yeah, very interesting to hear about, and positive that you managed to getting that out to the public. We do have a couple of questions. I think Clive's been answering a few in the background, but there's one here from Tim who says, I'm interested in the van Leaf version. He missed the specs on the higher battery that you outlined. Battery
Yeah, sure.
size.
That
range.
is the 40 kilowatt hour ENV 200 van. Gets you about 240 Ks, and it's around 50,000. So it depends on what kind of car, whether you're going for the 2-seater or 5 or 7-seater. They make them a little bit more expensive, and they're virtually new cars from the UK. They're a bit more expensive because the UK has a tax that we pay on it when it comes in. Hopefully we'll get a free trade agreement with the UK soon and make that easier. The beautiful thing is with the UK, they've got policies that they're by 2030 going to be banning the sales of internal combustion engines, including hybrids. So whilst we may not be having that kind of commitment here, at least we'll be able to have access to those markets as well and bring in vehicles from there.
There's a couple here, one asking about the expected ETA for a Brisbane bulk buy, and there's also someone asking about a Sydney-wide bulk buy. So
yeah, so to clarify, thank you for making that point, Ursula. It is a Sydney-wide bulk buy. The peak, our main partner within this is Beyond Zero Emissions Sydney North, working with a number of other partners throughout Sydney. The details will be register, and we'll send out the details once we're ready to launch that.
Okay, so the questions are coming in quick and fast. Norbert wants to know, do most EVs typically allow battery replacement?
That's a good question. I think most manufacturers, it's not necessarily in their business model to offer battery replacements. That doesn't mean the batteries can't be replaced. Yeah. It's probably the best way to. There's so little that actually goes wrong with the vehicles. So if you can replace the battery and extend its life, the drivetrain will go 1 million Ks without problem. It's the best way to keep that embodied energy on the road. And yeah, I'm sure that Clive would agree. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I'm, yeah, no, that's quite right. The battery is the issue. It's probably the battery replacement's a bit like an engine replacement in an internal combustion engine car. It's a one-time big expense that you do later in the life, and it depends on how the condition of the body is. Obviously, if you've treated the car badly, it may not go 1 million kilometers, but there's no reason inherently why it shouldn't go for a very long time.
And in that modeling, like the total cost of ownership, even when you account for a battery replacement, like for like, when you're looking at an internal combustion engine where you got the timing belt, the clutch, blown head gasket, whatever, you've got other big expenses for maintenance, it still adds up to be quite a cost competitive proposition, and you've just got a better vehicle.
A couple of people are interested to know what models are coming from you may be getting from the UK.
We're looking at quite a few different models from over there. There's the Honda E, which is an awesome little retro looking car. It's pretty expensive, but it's fantastic. It's the commercial vans is what we're really excited about, because that's the place with our mission of decarbonizing transport. That's where we're going to have the biggest impact. And those vehicles are going to be in the highest utilization. And for inner city businesses, it makes so much more sense to have quiet, clean vehicles running around.
Because they're often left idling, a lot of those.
Well, and EVs have a bigger cost advantage if they're primarily urban use than primarily highway use. The savings on petrol and maintenance are much, much higher compared to an urban operated internal combustion engine van. Yeah,
you get a longer range in the city due to the regenerative braking. It's fantastic, and the less resistance and drag.
And the vans are inefficient in the city. Yeah.
Peter wants to know, how long does the bulk buy process take?
So from the first step, we do it's like a month-long process. We could probably make that a little bit shorter, but that's what's been working for now. We do the main information sessions, and then we do detailed information sessions week on week after that. Most people just want to sign up and get their car. So we're finding that, we should just offer people a car. I think we've got probably one of the hardest ways to buy an electric car, and it's just testament to how much people really, really want to get cars, electric cars. Yes. So it probably takes about 3 to 4 months from sign up to delivery of the vehicle. Sorry, that's a long answer.
Okay. Someone wants to know, the prices you mentioned are on the road. Do we need to add stamp duty, registration, and other state-based fees, I guess?
Yeah, it's complicated for us delivering cars all over, because everywhere's got different requirements. So we make the cars affordable and provide everything that you need to go in and register it and pay stamp duty and whatnot.
Also, I'd like to know, what's the minimum number of purchases you need to make a bulk buy viable, I guess?
They're pretty resource intensive, but for us, I guess we kind of hedge it as well. Like if, 50 is fantastic, but anywhere, like the viability of running a bulk buy, we're mainly looking at capital cities, but we've run them out in Hepburn, down in the Huon Valley. It's I think a thing where we assess it on a number of merits. So whether it's strategically it makes sense to do something that could be more of a policy lever as well, and broader public benefit.
Mm-hmm. And Victor wants to know, you considering bringing in any other cars other than the Leaf?
Yeah, heaps of other cars. We're early days. I think what we have is just a proof of concept.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's we have a lot of work to do. There's 1.6 million cars sold annually. We've got to shift that pretty quickly. Yeah. It's not our job, not all our job, but we can help as much as possible.
Graham wants to know how old the cars you were bringing in and how many Ks they may have done.
The cars that come from Japan, they're really low Ks. Unfortunately, they don't get driven that much, and they've got a taxation system that means that people sell their cars very quickly. It becomes prohibitively expensive to have them after a couple of years. So they range from 2014 to 2020. Well, ongoing, we'll just keep on bringing in vehicles as they are. But the main thing that we do is we assess it on battery state of health. So does that answer it?
I think so, yes.
And the kilometers they've done, sorry, yes. So they range from like 40,000 Ks to 1,000 Ks. That's right. Yeah, or new. There's a couple off the lot from the UK.
I have a question here from Bridget, more for Clive, I guess. I only have a very hot car park to park my car. Do EVs hold up to intense heat okay, or do you need sun protection?
Depends where in the country you are. I'm presuming Sydney. If you can get it in the shade a little bit, that'd be good. Sydney's not as extreme as Broome or some other places, but parking in Sydney I wouldn't think would be too much of a problem for most of the year, and if you can get a bit of shade in the summer, that'd be nice.
Okay, there's a couple of questions about one. Tim wants to know, with the local bulk buys, I guess, whether you link up with local mechanics who...
Yeah, we always make sure that we have somebody local to service the vehicles.
Yeah.
Most of the servicing can be done by any mechanic, but we do provide tools and training for doing the EV work. It's just having the right tools to plug in and do diagnostics.
Cherry from Illawarra is saying she has a 2013 Leaf and she's had some technical problems. She's wondering if there's anyone other than Nissan she can take it to.
We haven't done anything in New South Wales yet. We're about to, and so that's part of scoping out the bulk buy. There is making sure that we've got all the right service partners and everything in place before we fully launch. So this is
and Steve wants to know. Steve must be from Victoria. He wants to know when the Geelong bulk buy is getting underway.
I think that's happening in July, but I'll register on the Good Car Co Geelong page. There'll be details on there, or we'll send it out to you.
Therese wants to know, asking to talk about insurance. I don't know if it's any different than any other type of vehicle.
Well, slightly different. I mean, for some of the imported vehicles, they may not be on the books or on the lists of vehicles that the insurers have, especially if you're just going through the online portals. Generally, it's the thing that you'd have to actually talk to somebody and get it. And insurance, in some cases, can be a little bit more expensive or the same. We've gone through Amy, Shannon's, UE, any number of insurers.
Okay. Bob wants to know whether you're expanding and going overseas across the ditch.
They do it. They were the inspiration for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're ahead of the game. As
They're well ahead
often
of the game.
happens.
We're taking learnings from there constantly.
Okay, David, we're nearly at the end of our questions. David wants to know what powers the air conditioning in a fully electric vehicle.
The air conditioner.
Yes.
Well, it's
The battery.
yeah.
It's a heat pump.
It is a heat pump. Yeah.
Yeah. Very easy.
It does reduce your range, but interestingly enough, in most cars, the air conditioning reduces your range less than the heating does in Tasmania.
Yeah. Okay. And Jai wants to know, will a Leaf charge faster on a 15 amp point than a 10 amp power point? I guess.
Yes, it will.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, it will. If you have a 15 amp EVSE, electric vehicle supply equipment, you can sometimes get equipment which has a 15 amp plug, but it's still only 10 amps. So you have to look at the rating of the piece of electronics to make sure that it's it's appropriate. And you can also buy some, which is quite useful, which are multi-power, that you can move the power up and down. And that gives you the flexibility of charging a bit faster when you have access to 15 amp. But if you've got a situation where you have other loads or you don't have access to a 15 amp power point, you can use a 10 amp to 15 amp circuit protected adapter and then turn it down so it will charge at a lower rate. And that gives you the flexibility to charge in places that otherwise you wouldn't be able to.
Okay. Phil wants to know, Anthony, when will the non-Leaf cars come online?
It's a process that we have to get each sample vehicle, bring them in, run them through a number of tests, put an evidence pack together and make sure they meet all Australian road design rules. So for each new model that comes online, it takes us about 6 months to get that ready before we can launch it into the market. So we've just got a couple of the vans coming over now. We haven't made the decision on the Honda yet, but we should probably have a wish list on the website and you can tick on that and we see when it becomes viable, because there's obviously a cost with getting each one of those vehicles added. So we need to make sure that and we need to make sure that we can support them as well. Like that's why I've gone with the Nissan Leaf. There's a lot of data and we know that we can do, firmware updates and support them. They're reliable.
Luke wants to know, do any retailers have supportive tariffs for EVs? Or is this way?
They do, yeah. It's mainly the big retailers at the moment. AGL and Origin have some EV tariffs. They're running trials at the moment. Even in Tasmania here, we've got a trial which is about to come out for smart chargers. It's mainly just being able to see how they can coordinate the EVs and the additional load in the network. And more often than not, I think that the answer will be that EVs aren't going to break the grid. They can actually support it in soaking up, surplus energy. And if you send the right kind of price signals out there, then that's the thing, that it can, especially once you put bidirectional capacity in, then that's a total game changer. But we're in early days. It's a lot more developed in other territories like the UK and Scandinavia and California and China and basically everywhere else that's ahead of the game in EVs.
Okay, so does the ENV 200 van does it have capacity to tow? Does it have a tow bar like the larger battery Leafs? Yeah,
virtually every EV has capacity to tow, whether they're actually warranted to do so from the manufacturer. So yes, it can tow a small box trailer. You'd have to get an engineer to certify whether it can tow more and fitting that tow bar. So it doesn't have a tow bar fitted. The vans that we're bringing from the UK can tow a ton and a half, and they're made for that. Like weekend killers.
Mark wants to know, is there any benefit from having 3-phase power for the charging?
Depends on the vehicle. Some cars can take 3-phase up to, the AC, like the Zoe can go up to 22, but the Leaf really is limited at 6.6 or 3.3.
Most cars in the market, in fact, are single phase chargers, onboard AC/DC converters. So It's really only a limited number of brands that offer three-phase. And just check with the manufacturer of the vehicle that you're looking at. But the vast majority are single phase.
Good.
Yeah.
Alan wants to know, will the Sydney bulk buy cars come registered in New South Wales? I guess it follows on from the previous
They'll come with
question.
roadworthy and ready to be registered, but yeah.
Okay, our last question comes from Mike, who I know has had a long interest in electric vehicles. He's asking whether you would consider importing the VW ID4. I'm not sure what that is, but VW Australia say they won't be bringing it in.
Yeah, that's the one that we are very interested in, the ID4 and the ID3. Yeah, I think they're amazing cars. And the brilliant thing is they're the first cars of VW that are actually built on the EV platform, built from the bottom up. Whereas most EVs are built as conventional cars with batteries whacked in. So yeah, it's great. And yes.
Okay, well, we'll sneak in one last question from Norbert about, can the Leaf put power back into my home? I'm sure that's just a matter of management.
It's a matter of a bidirectional charger
as well.
So yeah, every single EV that comes out of Japan has been mandated to have bidirectional capacity, and that's part of emergency response, which is incredible as well. Like that's what we should have in Australia for fire season, for every disaster that we seem to be having every season now. Yeah, it's just a matter of having the bidirectional charger in there, which is essentially two inverters.
And there's several models being tested at the moment for approval. It's a matter of getting them approved for Australian regulations. And I will say that they've generally been designed for European and overseas markets that don't have the solar penetration that we have, and some of our regulations about inverters and solar and interfacing with the grid conflict with the way some of the design work's been done for the overseas ones. So there's a bit of reconciliation and negotiation over what's acceptable.
It's a good way of putting it.
Okay, well, I'll take the right of having the last question in terms of just a broader picture about larger and commercial vehicles. Where do you see that, what the transformation with that's going to be like, or how soon will that tend to happen?
Inevitable, and sooner than we realize.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we'll see a gradual transition from small vans, which
seems we've just lost Clive again.
I think we'll see an inevitable transition from small vans and larger commercial vans, and also light and heavy transport. We're getting into that point where they're becoming more and more economically viable. And the thing is, once every single manufacturer, they're already moving towards electric vehicles. We just won't be able to buy non-electric cars within the next decade. That's the thing. For a brief time, we're going to be the dumping ground of diesel and petrol and hybrid, and we're going to end up with all the crap that none of the world wants. And that's what we're graciously being led into by our benevolent leaders.
Oh, then we can export to Africa. Come on.
Yeah, it's shocking. We really... Yeah. Anyway.
And part of that's not just the lack of incentives, it's because we have such low quality performance requirements for vehicles as well.
Yeah, and we have these incumbent systems that have got massive resources and lobbying power and great vested interests that we're locked into this system that is very difficult to shift. But
okay, well, I think we'll draw things to a close. So I'd like to thank Anthony and Clive very much. I think it's been very informative. We've had a lot of people online. So, so if you want to know more, go to the AEVA website and to the Good Car Company website. And I think at that point, we'll say good evening to everyone.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye now.